to call us all to order.
Hardly.
This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Salem. I think I do too.
Yeah, they didn't
This
know
is
it
the
was
regularly scheduled meeting of the Salem Keizer School Board, Support Services Center, Room 2, 2575 Commercial Street Southeast, Salem, Oregon, May 9th, 2017 at about 6 p.m. The first thing on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Will you all join me, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Christy, can you call the roll?
Nancy McMorris Audix.
Here.
Paul Kylo.
Here.
Chris Brantley.
Here.
Marty Hyen.
Here.
Jim Green, who's not here yet. Rick Kimball.
Here.
Chuck Lee.
Here.
Thank you, Christy. For agenda modifications tonight, we have added action item 3B, which is the Howard Street Charter School charter renewal. And your meeting agenda has been updated to reflect that we have canceled the meeting on the 16th, next Tuesday, which should make some of you happy. Next thing on our agenda is the Spotlight on Success.
Good evening, everyone. Our first spotlight is going to be presented by Jay Remy, our Director of Communications, and he is going to present the Volunteer of the Month.
Thank you, Superintendent Perry, Chair McMorris Audix, and members of the board. If I could get Jessica Ochin, the Pringle Office Manager, to come forward along with Chad Harvey, and please join the board chair and the superintendent. Chad Harvey was nominated as Volunteer of the Month by Pringle Elementary staff. He has 2 students at Pringle, a 3rd grader and a kindergartner. Chad has been volunteering at Pringle since his 3rd grade child entered kindergarten. All activities considered, he has volunteered in the Salem Keizer district for 10 years. Chad volunteers weekly in his daughter's 3rd grade classrooms, supporting reading groups and literacy programs. He has served as Pringle's Parent Club president and as the vice president. He volunteers at Pringle's book fairs, helping to organize the fair and run the cash drawer. Chad says that supporting local schools through volunteer hours and donations is a non-negotiable part of belonging to a community. Chad has not only been a volunteer, but a business partner for Pringle as well. He has been a real estate broker since 2013 and recently opened his own brokerage firm, the Harvey Realty Group. While he enjoys success in his real estate career, he is most thankful for the opportunity it has provided him to invest in the Salem Keizer community. Chad was Pringle's title jogathon sponsor, for which Pringle Elementary is very thankful. It is for these reasons that we recognize and thank Chad for his time and contribution to Pringle Elementary and the Salem Keizer community, and congratulations to Chad Harvey as one of our Volunteers of the Month. Thank you.
All right, next Volunteer of
Okay,
the Month.
next if we could have Kennedy Principal Jesse Leonard come forward with Ashley Huerta. Nominated by Kennedy Elementary staff, Ashley Huerta was selected as a Volunteer of the Month for May. She has been volunteering at Kennedy for 5 years. For the past 2 years, Ashley has served as the Parent-Teacher Club president. In this role, she has developed a team of volunteers who continually work together to expand Kennedy's parent involvement and business partnerships. Due to Ashley's leadership, more parents are involved, more staff are informed, and more funds are raised to support school needs. Some examples of the many things Ashley does, and this is only a few of many more. Organizes the Jogathon event and incentive program. She set records in fundraising the last 2 years, raising thousands of dollars to fund technology purchases and field trips for the students. She helps with Kennedy's after-school enrichment program enrollment, providing opportunities for over 300 students. Helps with the organization of the annual reading incentive program. Helps with book fairs. Organizes the staff appreciation lunch every year. Recruits volunteers and businesses to support events. Coordinated Kennedy's first Jamba Juice fundraiser. Organized family movie night. Reached out to non-English speaking parents to increase involvement, both in Parent-Teacher Club and the Parent-Teacher Club Board. She volunteers for field day and field trips. She is the volunteer photographer for Kennedy's Student of the Month Awards, photographing 80 students a month. And this is not even a complete list, but we'll stop right there. Ashley's work at the school and her time spent there is so appreciated by the Kennedy staff and the Kennedy elementary community that they consider her an honorary Kennedy staff member. On behalf of Kennedy Elementary and Salem Keizer School community, we thank you and congratulations to Ashley Huerta. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Remy is now going to present our Business Partner of the Month.
Okay, if Elise Williams could come forward along with Clinton and Sarah Lederer from Baskin-Robbins in West Salem. And please join the board chair and the superintendent. Baskin-Robbins in West Salem is our Business Partner of the Month. The owners and operators are Clinton and Sarah Lederer. Myers Elementary school staff nominated them. Clint and Sarah have provided support to their area schools and community for several years. They often provide Myers teachers and staff with ice cream treats or coupons. Kalapuya staff also received ice cream coupons to give to students as incentives. Brush College would like to acknowledge Baskin-Robbins' generosity of giving a scoop of ice cream for students that turn in a monthly reading log and monthly snacks donated for parent club meetings. Our other West Salem schools have also received coupons and donations, which has become a favorite award to receive and a great incentive to the students. On behalf of the Salem Keizer students and the community, thank you to West Salem Baskin-Robbins for providing such nice treats and encouraging the students to achieve their best. Congratulations.
Next is our Community Partner of the Month.
Okay. So if Bush Elementary Principal Monica Takata could come forward, and Hoover Elementary Principal Jen Vanslander, if she's here, and Dr. Ralph Yates, Baha Wanley, and Jenny Tomka from Salem Health, if they are here. Thank you. So we are proud to recognize Salem Health as our selected Community Partner of the Month. Hoover and Bush Elementary staff nominated them for their incredible partnerships with our schools. Representing Salem Health are Dr. Ralph Yates, Chief Medical Officer, Baha Wanley, Chief Operations Officer, and Jenny Tomka, Director of Physician Practice Operations. This past year, Salem Health donated 300 backpacks to our schools. The backpacks were distributed to Cummings, Four Corners, Grant, Hoover, Kennedy, and Miller elementary schools for their most needy students. For many years, Salem Health has been a valuable supporter of Bush Elementary. During the past 2 years alone, Salem Health has provided holiday gifts to 80 of Bush's most needy families. Each family member received a gift. They have also donated money to Bush's special needs classrooms and have participated in special events like the career fair. The Salem Keizer school community are deeply appreciative of Salem Health's kindness and generosity. So thank you for your continued partnership in supporting our students in the Salem Keizer School District, and congratulations as our Community Partner of the Month. Thank you.
Next, we have Sandy Price, our Elementary Level Director.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to welcome from Shirley Elementary School, Principal Clinton Gertenrich and student Blake Lovell. And from Sumter Elementary, Principal Janet Pratz and student Ruben Polkowski. We will see that Ruben gets his certificate. So, Blake Lovell from Shirley Elementary School and Ruben Polkowski from Sumter Elementary School were the top winners in the 27th running of the Math 24 Challenge held on April 8th at McKay High School. Nearly 175 students forming teams of 4th and 5th graders from all across Salem Keizer elementary schools competed. Over 100 math students from McKay High School volunteered to organize, promote, and run the competition, led by event coordinator Teresa Grindy, a math teacher at McKay High School. Students play the Math 24 card game that emphasizes math skills and number fluency with the hopes of advancing on to the final rounds. The game features cards that show 4 numbers in each corner. The goal is to use all 4 of those numbers in any combination, addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division, to reach the number 24. Both students performed at the highest levels in the competition and are recognized for excellence in mathematics. Blake Lovell won the 5th grade division, and Ruben Polkowski won the 4th grade division. We congratulate you both for your outstanding effort and are proud of you and the rest of the participants who competed at the district-wide competition. Congratulations.
At this time, I'd like to invite Principal Linda Doherty and Battle Creek teacher Stacy Sturgis and Corey Kadaya to the podium. They will be sharing the teacher spotlight on implementation of ReadyGen curriculum. Do you want to start? Introduce yourself.
Good evening. Thank you for having us here this evening. Corey Kadaya and Stacy Sturgis are here to give a brief presentation on our transition with ReadyGen. We were a year 1 implementation school, and so this is our 2nd year, and so they are going to share a little bit of that journey with you. Okay, you want to start?
All right, we were trying to figure out where to start with everything, and so we kind of just went through kind of just this process that we've gone through. So the transition was already mentioned. We're a year 2. Our school and most of the district kind of went from a workshop model, and so this is kind of a full 180 for most of us as staff. And so we looked at challenges, and in our discussion we talked about that some of the challenges are the writing component that we're dealing with sometimes feels a little disconnected, some limitation of flexibility and opportunity for creativity, where on the other side that was definitely heavily creativity because we didn't have much, we didn't have a program. And then focus from small grouping to really now a lot more whole grouping and then balancing out that time. So.
Yeah, so another challenge we also talked about, resistance. Sometimes teachers might resist on some things, or most people will too. It kind of went from a small group, mostly you met with your small groups, you had your groups of kids, this level, this year, to really ReadyGen went to a whole group, which every kid is involved. In that whole group lesson, everybody has that text. So there were some challenges or a little bit resistance from teachers thinking, how am I going to meet the needs of those individual groups if all of my kids are involved in the same text? And then also sorting through the materials, I think that was kind of challenging, or I don't know, maybe frustrating for teachers. They felt like there was a lot of materials to look through. Obviously, we have so much time on our hands. So that's hard sometimes to find out that there was, and I think there's probably still materials that we haven't looked completely through or had the time just to really dive in and look at. And then balancing the use of time, and then pacing. I thought we found that teachers found the pacing, the flow of the lessons were a little bit, getting used to, I guess, is a way to put it. It was kind of a challenge of the flow of the lessons, but.
So the next part we looked at was implementation, and this is our 2nd year, so I know a lot of schools are in their 1st year, and for us being in the 2nd year, kind of going from that beginning to feeling some pushback to, kind of getting to the place where there's acceptance with the change, and trying to just kind of figure out how to, use our background with what we know, and just making that work. part of it for us, I think, was just jumping in and just getting dirty with it. And I think the message for us in year one maybe wasn't quite that message in the first year. I think this year it's a little more of that message to the year one schools. And so definitely just getting in there and using the materials and just kind of fumbling around with them and figuring out how to use them and not feeling, like every piece of the material has to be used. And so we're kind of trying to get a good balance with that. We're slowly adding some creativity in and being supported in those decisions on pacing and with our teams.
Yeah, I think teachers, since it is kind of a fairly scripted curriculum, I felt like teachers maybe thought they couldn't put their flair into it or their creativity, which I think teachers are finding that they can. It doesn't take the teaching out of who you are. It's a curriculum for you, which we all kind of thought that we wanted, but you can still put your creativity and still be who you are teaching. So I think the pushback kind of did go away from that. Successes, we really have seen some, especially at Battle Creek. I think the whole point of having the curriculum was consistency throughout every school. Everybody's doing the same thing, even though you still put your creativity in it. We're all on the same page. If we have a lot of mobility. Same pace, and if students move, hopefully they're coming into the school and you're at the same place. So they can pick up and go. Materials for all. A lot of teachers were struggling the fact that they didn't have materials for themselves, so they are definitely given to us and you have a curriculum for you. And then the mobility, as I spoke about, that now kids can go from school to school and pick up right where they're at.
So I represent primary, I teach first grade. And so one of the things that we noticed right off the bat, the text is definitely above grade level text. And so that at first you're kind of like, we were like, wow, this is above first grade level. How are they going to read this? But one of the things that we have found that's a success, I think, is that there is really rich language, and the vocabulary when you walk in our room. I know that some of our bosses, your bosses have walked in also and seen some of the vocabulary and thought they were in a fourth grade room, in a first grade room. And so one of the things that we're finding is that having books in the kids' hands, every kid having a book in their hand, even a child that's low or high, we are seeing that they're being able to approximate readers. So someone that's a low reader gets to go through that reading behavior and actually, do that. And through that being repeated over and over, I think that we are finding that our lower readers are having some success. And then also just whole group reading, supporting just good behavior, what good readers do. And sometimes I think maybe in the workshop model, sometimes those kids didn't get enough time in what that good reading behavior should look like. And then I think the last thing that's really, I think, is exciting is the link to science. I think what we've seen in this is that maybe, I'm trying to remember what it used to be called. Everything has so many different names.
Yeah.
So just bringing, thematic approach, I guess. I think some of that science being wrapped into the reading units has been kind of refreshing too. And so I think that's as far as a primary side of it. And the high kids, the tech kids are definitely stimulated with the higher level and the science connection.
So I'll just speak briefly about intermediate. We just want to say, some of you will hear probably the same thing, which is exciting for us. I think one of the biggest things I've seen is the confidence that these kids are. I just see so much more confidence. These lower kids that maybe people say, you can't be at this level, you can't. They're listening, they're hearing, they're participating in discussions. And I've seen tremendous actually reading growth. Just the fact that they can still hear and listen to the reading, and then they're still involved in this discussions. And even if they're picking up the word the or a, they're still reading with the whole group. And they're not separated, as I'm always in that group. Building confidence, as I talked about. My low reading groups have probably shown the most growth I've seen in a while. This is my 11th year, and I think it's because they're involved in that whole group and that confidence is being built. And everybody has access to the same text. I'm hearing conversations outside of when we have our discussions with my lower and high readers. They're still talking about the text, whereas if they were in their small group, they wouldn't have the access to the same text. So
yeah,
I think
so
the
it's a
biggest thing is-
little scary, I think, as teachers, to give up that control and not know, is this really working? Because it's a little different. We had a lot more time with kids, and so now that it's changed, I mean, we're seeing some pretty good stuff. You're seeing kids read some pretty good text, and it's pretty impressive. And Salem Keizer's teachers are awesome. You guys know that. But so I think as we keep working forward, we're going to continue to get better at it and be able to put our flair in it and do what's best and manage it all.
Yeah, so, yep.
Thank you. You are awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Next thing on the agenda is audience communication on agenda items, and I have one person signed up, which is Mindy Merritt. I will remind you that you need to limit your comments to 3 minutes. If you have copies of materials, you can give them to Christy. And I don't see our little timer thing, so maybe there'll be like a little noise or something that goes off.
Okay, that sounds perfect. Superintendent Perry, Board Chair McMorris Addix, Vice Chair Kylo, and members of the board. My name is Mindy Merritt, and I reside at 2381 Teal Drive Southeast, and I'm here to speak to you tonight as the president of Salem Keizer Education Association. I would like to begin by sharing that as an association, we value the decisions, the work that Superintendent Perry has been leading our district in, and believe with her continued leadership that as a district, we will remain focused on the work that is necessary for all students to succeed. I would also like to recognize that some of the questions and or concerns that I will be sharing will not be the first time that they have been shared, but as an association, we believe that the issues we bring forward are fundamental to the success of all students. The following are thoughts, questions, and concerns related to the statements within the evidence of compliance sections from Executive Limitations 11 academic programs. Number one, a significant amount of attention is paid to the implementation of next generation science standards as required by the state. The focus of our concerns is twofold. Our first concern is regarding the elimination of the 2 science PA positions within the 17-18 budget message, and we are wondering who will now be responsible for the support and successful implementation of the state-required next-generation science standards for grades K through 12. We would also like to address the impact that the elementary master schedule has had on a sizable number of our elementary schools. We have not seen on any elementary locked master schedule a defined time for science, yet teachers are still responsible for teaching to all standards, not just math, reading, and writing. Within this report, professional development is described as having options, but the trainings that are referred to were not optional. Many teachers have expressed concerns and/or frustrations around the one-size-fits-all approach to embedded PD. Data teams and PBIS supports at many elementary schools have not been clearly articulated and/or have been poorly executed. Consequently, teachers do not value them and continue to struggle with relevant outcomes. Number 3, the question here is related to the phrasing of the limitation. The superintendent shall not fail to encourage innovating programs when and where appropriate. Based on the evidence of compliance, is there an instance outside of TAG or the 2 elementary charter schools, Valley Inquiry, and Optimum Learning Environment, that it is appropriate for innovative programs to exist within our elementary schools? How can schools be innovative when teacher voice is removed from classroom-level decisions? And number 7, the statement from Superintendent Perry is quite true. Student behavior is consistently brought forward as a concern across all employee groups. The fact is that in its current form, PBIS alone has not ensured a learning environment that is safe for students and staff alike. Furthermore, the adoption of an administrative policy has not helped those employing PBIS to see its value. There are schools where PBIS has been successful. Unfortunately, the schools where it is unsuccessful have many students and staff feeling caught with escalating behaviors. Current resources are incapable of supporting the needs of the individual student and sustaining a positive learning environment. We understand that full implementation of PBIS will take time. Our question is, what will be in place to support individual students' success during this transition? As an association, we value the decisions and the work that Superintendent Perry has been leading our district in, and we look forward to continued collaboration as we work to ensure the success of all students. Thank you.
Thank you. Next thing on our agenda is the action items. Superintendent Perry.
So your first action item is the Willamette ESD board member, and Willamette ESD has a board governance structure that differs from school districts. And of the 9 board members, 5 members are elected by the boards of the school districts that they serve. The recommendation here is that there's 1 position for Salem Keizer School District Zone 5 and 1 candidate. The candidate was not invited because you have met him before, and that is Larry Trott, and we checked in with board leadership to see if you had questions for him tonight. So the action tonight is for you to vote on a candidate for Zone 5, and you have 1 candidate, Larry Trott.
I move we approve Larry Trott as the Willamette ESD candidate.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion?
I just wanted to note that I was not able to get in touch with him, so I'll be abstaining because I have not met him.
Okay. Any other comments? All in favor of Larry Trott for the WESD Zone 5 position, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Do I say aye to that?
Okay, the motion carries. Next thing on our agenda is the Howard Street Charter School charter renewal. You received this, I believe, electronically, and you also have the entire document in front of you.
The charter agreement with Howard Street Charter School expires on June 30th, 2017. We began negotiations, as you've known, and we've been in the process ever since. You extended the deadline for approval by 30 days at our last board meeting. The modifications in the contract that is attached are as follows. Updated dates and legal references throughout the document provides for a 5-year term till 2022. Updated enrollment and admissions language on page 3 and 4. Updated language regarding the district's delivery of special education services on page 5 through 7. Changing the section regarding evaluation of student performance to align with standards for other district charter schools on page 8. Changing the funding level from 100% of ADMW to 85% of ADMW to align with the funding levels at all the other charter schools. Change the language to allow the district to provide 2 fiscal years' notice to Howard Street Charter School that it must move from the South Salem High School Annex for any reason. Previously, the district could provide 2 years' notice if there was an unforeseen event requiring the district to use the space. Retains language allowing the district to provide 6 months' notice if it needs the space due to a catastrophic event. And it provides for relocation assistance to Howard Street in the form of help with moving, labor and trucks, and a stipend of $10,000 a year for up to 3 years in the event Howard Street Charter School is moved for the annex. If it's in the last 2 years of the contract, it would be $20,000. Change language clarifying that the Howard Street Charter School will serve as the employer for all staff that are not currently district employers, and updating outdated language regarding compliance with district policy. And you have a copy attached.
And the district, the staff is recommending that we approve the charter contract as revised for a 5-year term beginning July 1st, 2017 and ending June 30, 2022. Is there a motion?
I'll move approval as revised. I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion?
I have a question. Their board has approved these terms, the Howard Street Board?
We got information just a half an hour ago or so that their board has approved these recommended changes.
Okay, thank you.
Jim?
So I notice one of the terms that's in here is to provide relocation assistance to them in the form of helping and a stipend of $10,000 for up to 3 years. When we asked J. Gems to move, did we provide them a stipend?
No, we did not.
And I guess if we're trying to treat all charter schools the same, I have a problem with that. That's a $30,000 essential gift to them for moving out of a facility, and I'm going to vote no on this contract based on that.
Other comments? All in favor of the charter as modified, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Abstentions? I think the motion carries 5-2.
Who were the no's, please?
Paul and Jim. They spoke so loudly, it made it sound like more people. That was my confusion. Next thing on our agenda is the adoption of the consent calendar. Generally, these are taken all in one fell swoop, unless someone has a need to pull anything. Do any board members have any items that need to be pulled? Seeing none, I would take a motion.
I move adoption as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the consent calendar. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Next thing on our agenda is readings. We have none. Reports, monitoring report, EL 11 academic program, Superintendent Perry.
So this is executive limitation number 11 around academic programs, and it is a weighty report that I know you've had time to read. And I want to highlight a couple things. One of the attempts I have attempted to do in these reports to you is, even if there's evidence of non-compliance, to tell you generally where we have some concerns within the district. And so one of them is definitely around the Ready Gen materials. And in part, it is we've talked about this before, a Pearson materials issue. And so that is under number 5, modifications of the instructional program. And I put it under evidence of compliance, but I do want to let you know I'm still attending to the issue around our bilingual materials for Ready Gen. And as you heard tonight, there is still an implementation timeline. So I wouldn't ever want you to think everything is perfect. It is around implementation and getting used to materials, but it's also holding the Pearson accountable for that, and Paul DeCopolis and I have been working on that. And then the second area that I think is really important to highlight is the positive behavior. There's the behavioral issues, and I know I have addressed that within the budget message. We continue to leave positive behavior interventions and supports on the strategic plan, not because we believe it is the end-all be-all for every student behavior, but it is an important foundational component of our work. And again, I don't want you to think in any way it's a perfect implementation. It is about a range of implementation. There are 65 schools, just like there are 44 with Ready Gen. So the reality is we've got to keep moving along on the strategy. There were no out-and-out evidences of non-compliance, but I do want you to know I'm attending to a few of those items as we move along. So do you have questions regarding the report?
Jim?
So I'll harp on this again.
Yep. Please do.
I'm still ticked off at Pearson.
Me too.
We expended a great deal of this school district's money, and they still can't get our bilingual curriculum right. We are expending a great deal of staff time and resources in order to create that on our own. I hope that you and Mr. DeCopolos continue to provide Pearson with at least this board member's considerable upset with them over their inability to meet the needs of this school district. And I think a large proportion of our students across the state, and students across the United States, I think it's discriminatory on their part. And I hope we do bring this up with Pearson and are willing to bring all full legal arguments to bear on that.
It's a clear difference in materials, in rigor and amount of materials for our bilingual students. We agree with your sentiments, and Paul is on it.
Paul?
Item 2.
Yes.
Want to pull your,
Oh, sorry. Item 2, provide the information. Is that English, Spanish, English and Spanish? Is it in any other languages?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't think I have it right off the top. I know we have other languages on multiple things. I was thinking today about Parent View and wondering if that was, so let me come back to you with that one.
All right, thank you.
That was a great question.
other questions? I have one. It seems to me when we first heard about PBIS, there was kind of a long-term look at how long you thought it would take for full implementation and for it to feel like it was being used with consistency and fidelity to the system and all of those kinds of things to see some kind of positive results. And we're pretty early in it. What was that timeline? Was it 5 years?
Yeah,
or-
it was 3 to 5 years for initial implementation and 7, 8 years for that cultural change that's sustaining. So it should remain on the strategic plan for, I would say, 4 or 5 years before it might be removed as a strategic plan item because the systems are in place. And the other piece about PBIS, it is having the appropriate interventions for students that are exhibiting those tier 3 behaviors, which are the hardest behaviors, some of which are the intervention is more of a self-contained classroom, and we still have self-contained. So it's a combination of the behaviors for PBIS structures as the foundation, and then what are your interventions and your range of interventions for those students exhibiting those tier 3 behaviors. So long answer, 3 to 5 years for initial implementation, 8 years for sustained cultural practice.
Chris?
When we talked about this last, I can't remember if it was last year for this report or whether it was sometime in the interim, we talked at some length about the need for some sort of a transitionary phase and a way to deal with students who are highly disruptive during the time before the school has their whole sort of cooperative way of going about discipline figured out and made real. Could you fill us in on some of the strategies that different buildings are trying to do that transition?
So in the budget message, you saw that refocus on behavioral learning. So there are a variety of strategies, truthfully not enough resources. So I'll say that, not enough resources. But the strategies range from behavior cadre, which comes out to help train and put together a behavior plan, to all the way from there to self-contained classrooms. So we do have behavioral self-contained classrooms, our EGC classrooms. The problem is they're full, and we've got to get ways to get them back into regular classrooms so they can have core academic support. So in the budget message, we did add resources to behavior cadre because right now the time is too long. In a school or two, there's like an academic intervention where kids can have timeout places for behavior. The complicating factor is there were some legal changes to the law around removing kids from school at the elementary. So it's not perfect yet out there, but we do have those range of strategies. And with the leadership of David Fender, who really understands those behaviors, he's already moved the work forward quickly, but it doesn't feel quick if you're still dealing with students with behaviors in your classroom.
Other comments? I'll remind the board that the executive limitations make up the superintendent's evaluation. We usually signify acceptance of the report with either a thumbs up or not. Looks like we have consensus. Next thing on our agenda is a report on the strategic plan. Is that John?
Yes. And I'll preface this while you're getting up here. I did say to John, this is a 3-meeting night, so brief on your strategic plan report, and he's happy to answer as many questions as possible or to speak more about it at a later time. But in his defense, I prefaced it with it's a 3-meeting night.
I've cut down my comments from about an hour and a half to 40 minutes. I hope that's okay for the. Okay.
That was good.
Hopefully we can get the PowerPoint up here for a little visual aid. But as Christy said, I'm happy to be here and answer questions. So good evening, Chair McMorris-Addix and Superintendent Perry. I wanted to start out as we're getting our PowerPoint going by reminding the board that this update is an overview of a report that is contained in the board materials and specifically highlights information in the strategic plan on items 9 and 10. And those are relatively large components to the work that we do in the Human Resources Department. And then hence my joke about the amount of time that we could spend talking about this information. So as we have questions tonight, please ask. And if we need to schedule additional time or individual follow-up, I'm happy to do that.
Where's Bob when we need him? Can you tell jokes? There it is.
Now we need the lights down. There we go. Nope, other
The other way.
ones.
There we go.
There we go.
There we go.
Great.
Okay, so as highlighted, these are the two areas that we'll be talking about for a few minutes. A little background information this year. As we all know, we are in a funding downturn based on state revenues, and the upcoming Budget Committee meeting will be talking, I'm sure, in great detail about that. That is of particular importance as we talk about these strategic plan initiatives, because when we're talking about the staffing and hiring and recruitment process, funding is an important component to the work that we do. And although we are in a downturn, we are also still hiring, and I will explain that in a little bit more detail. In an effort to reallocate the positions that we use in the district with some reductions, that creates the need to shift more staff around than maybe we would experience in a year of economic growth. And so this year, we have had to move over 90 licensed staff members into different positions, and that requires more movement than we would again experience in a growth year. And this process took into account multiple sources of input with particular attention to our title schools so that we can continue to honor the importance of staffing those schools with our highest qualified staff. I put up here to be really clear that we are not in a reduction in force, which would be the eliminating staff positions. And the part about the hiring continues. As I mentioned, it's a little bit challenging in these economic situations where it requires a lot of staff movement, but the natural attrition that we have every year will require us to hire new positions, even though we're not refilling those on a one-to-one basis. And we're going to talk just a little bit about how we're continuing to hire and manage that during the same time that current employees are being asked to move to some different positions. We were excited this year that our recruiting efforts were able to create a new online presence for us. That came in the way of some work that we did with ESO Marketing in order to develop a particular website that focuses on telling the Salem Keizer story. If we had more time tonight, I would take you to that page and show you some of the information there. But I encourage you, if you haven't, to go look at employment opportunities on the Salem Keizer webpage and follow the links to some of the videos. We have interviews with current staff talking about what it's like to live and work in our community. And we have already found this information to be really helpful, both with recruiting locally and outside of the area. We've also continued with our practice that we really started last year about what we call early hiring, which is a way to reach out to both licensed and classified candidates, what we consider to be earlier than typical in the school year and fiscal year process, in order to talk about open positions and opportunities for employment. The way that we've navigated that this year has been to utilize what we call pool hiring. So we had the Salem Keizer Job Fair, which was successful again for us this year. We made some great refinements under Steve Nelson's suggested changes, and we're able to see about 300 teacher candidates at that event. Of those, we were able to extend some offers of employment in what we call a pool hire, meaning that they are offered a position with us with the location and specific grade level to be determined. Secondary, we were able to offer some more specific subject area assignments. And the reason that we do that, as I mentioned in the earlier slide, in order to move staff around as a product of the economic conditions, we had to preserve the opportunity to make sure that current teachers have appropriate assignments in places that we need them before we place new hires into the district. And I should say that out of those 90-some transfers, we're down to just a few people left that will need to be given an identified assignment, and we've already started placing many of our folks that are in what we consider the pool of hired candidates. Another area that we've been working hard on the last couple of years is what we call pathways programs. This slide highlights several areas not including special education pathways, which you have heard about from us previously. So we have continuing our work in special education pathways programs, but the ones I wanted to highlight tonight include the fact that we're continuing to support teacher cadet programs in our high schools, and that we're even having conversations with students in middle school about their interest in teaching as a career. We have good participation with those programs. We also have 33 former students who are now attending Western Oregon University in a bilingual scholar program. That program is sponsored by the university, but in conjunction with us, the plan is to have those students complete a teacher education program and then return to us as teachers, with the projected first round of students being available to start teaching in the fall of 2019.
Do you want questions at the end?
Questions now are fine.
Are we doing anything with scholarships for those students, or are they on their own, or how are they?
The university offers scholarships for those students, and my understanding is that's on a sliding scale depending on need.
We do some summer employment as well of them to help them with that gap.
Good question. We also are excited that we now have 14 classified employees who are currently enrolled in our bilingual cohort that we're operating with Corbin University. And those folks are in the beginning stages of that, with the plan that they will enter the teaching workforce as bilingual teachers for us in fall of 2018. We've also been focusing this year to expand our classified recruiting efforts. When I gave updates at this time last year, we talked about a particular shortage in the area of bus drivers, but we also know that we need lots of high-quality classified employees in many areas, and so some of the things that we have been doing include partnerships with these organizations and establishing a stronger connection and presence in the community. We were able to host our first career fair for non-teaching positions. It was a very exciting event that included multiple departments from our district and had over 200 people participate. And this year we have specifically increased the number of bus driver applicants and trainees in an effort to reduce our bus driver shortage. And the data that I shared tonight is showing that we have 69 which is number of applicants and or trainees in process, as opposed to 50 that we had year end last year. So we're on track to increase that by about 50% from what we had last year.
Marty, how many do we need total?
How many bus drivers at one time, or how many
Yes.
openings?
No, at one time, if we could fill everything we needed, how many bus drivers at one time would we have?
Oh gosh, I hesitate to answer without checking. I don't know if anybody in the room has that number. I'd be happy to get it for you.
Estimate? It's fine.
It's hard to even know. It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's
I'm just, is it we need 5,000 bus drivers?
no,
or
hundreds,
100?
hundreds, not thousands.
Hundreds.
Hundreds?
Hundreds, not thousands. And because those folks have varying schedules.
I don't.
I'll get you the information and let you know. Be happy to check on it. We've also been really working to expand both the number of universities that we connect with, and also developing deeper relationships with universities that we have been working with for a period of time. We've already talked about the teacher pathway programs. Student-teacher placements and supervision tends to be central to our work. We sometimes get excited about all of these recruiting efforts that are finding people who have completed those programs, but we know it's important to provide really great supports for people who are completing their teacher education program, and we have people working on that on a regular basis, that we don't want to overlook that as a connection for new candidates. We also continue to be strategic about the recruiting at job fairs, and this year we were also able to attend some job fairs at universities we hadn't previously attended before. In particular, Northern California, we went to, I believe it was the University of Sacramento, where we had some connections with good teacher candidates. We're working specifically with hiring and retention training with our administrators. We do this through what we call a Human Resources Clinic, which is a time for us to meet with our administrative staff. And we focus this year in particular on helping remind our principals and supervisors about the importance of having explicit retention conversations with staff. Can't share enough how much we value and appreciate staff, both in our licensed and classified positions. And we've also started some conversations about behavioral-based interviewing techniques in order to continue to improve our selection process. Diversity in hiring, I think this is often a question on many people's mind and one that we focus on in everything that we do. And I wanted to share a little data that we were able to pull together based on last year's information. As you can see up here, we received over 1,200 teacher applications. Of those, 184 were diverse candidates, and this is based on candidates self-identifying and selecting the categories reflected based on federal standards. And so of those 184, 51 were offered positions, and you can see the breakdown of those positions up there. This information, of course, is really helpful to the work that we do and how we can continue to refine our strategies so that we recruit and hire a workforce that better reflects the community and the students we serve. The part about this data that has been challenging is we do a great job of collecting information that helps us with this, but we don't collect it in a single system or a way that makes it easy to review on an ongoing basis. And so we have been working to look at ways to make the data more predictive and less reflective. And that gives us some of the next steps that we're informing our work for next year. And you may recall that in the proposed strategic plan next year, number 7 talks about analyze recruitment, hiring, induction strategies through enhanced human resources metrics in order to increase organizational efficiency and diversity in our workforce. And that is really so that we are doing a better job of not just collecting information, but also using the information to inform practice.
Jim?
So, John, I had a question for you on the diversity hiring. Do you know what our current percentage of diversity is within our teaching force?
I do. I'm sorry, I don't have it with me tonight, though.
And I'm going to ask you then administrative force, and then I'm going to ask you our classified force.
Okay.
Because all the data shows that as students see those folks who replicate them in front of them, either as teachers or administrators or classified, that only helps with their student achievement along the way. And we should be achieving our number 7 strategic plan of getting better diversity amongst our staff to at least. We probably won't ever mirror what our student population is in this district, but at least decrease that growing divide between that.
Sure.
If you could get that for me, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
What also would be helpful is to see a change over time.
Yep, we have both those.
Chris?
This is just some information for the board that I bring to you from my work with Teacher Standards and Practices Commission. A couple years ago, both accreditation organizations for schools of education, teacher training preparation programs, merged. The resulting program the resulting accreditor called the Council for Accreditation of Educator Preparation, or CAPE, is requiring that all schools of education now have these kinds of close relationships with surrounding school districts, wherein they monitor the effectiveness of their graduates in those programs and alter their programs in light of what those districts around them need. And so it's forcing all of our schools of education around here to really start looking at what are the needs. And that, of course, is forcing a real strong look at diversity in the workforce. And then the key is whether or not they get accredited is going to be dependent on if they can show that the people they are producing in their program are in fact what the districts around them need, are in fact being effective in the classroom. That's what's going to determine whether they continue to be accredited. It's a real shift in how that whole system works, and I think it's really going to help down the line with this stuff. Compound that by the fact that the legislature a couple of years said that by 2022, anybody that wants to train teachers in the state of Oregon has to be CAPE accredited, and it sort of aligns the stars in a nice way. So that's just information for your future as you think about this on the board.
I also want to make a comment about the attention to the recruitment strategies. Even in a reduction time, we need to be sure that we're attending to the pipeline programs. And that's why John and I talked about being sure that he highlighted those programs, because we know that we can't go out and get enough diverse candidates, and that we have bright and talented kids in our system that will be amazing educators. So it's attending to recruitment and that pipeline.
Yes.
Well,
John, of the 1,242 teacher applications,
Mhm.
did we actually hire?
I'd give you an approximate number, but I could check. Approximately 300 of those. Mhm.
I'll just tag on with what I was just telling you and what Christy said, that Western Oregon was one of the first to go through CAPE accreditation, and so when they were really chomping at the bit to find ways to work with our district to find ways to do that.
I would just add that we know there is still an ongoing teacher shortage, and that while retention is still a focus for us, we also know that in general, our overall attrition rate, at least amongst licensed staff, is in line with what we see around the state. And so we're looking at ways to, of course, be ahead of the curve, and also to look at ways to continue these pathways so that we are not the recipients of the teacher shortage. You may recall last year at this time I shared some data that talked about the number of graduates coming out of Oregon universities not meeting the needs for teachers across all of the Oregon school districts. Likewise, we know that of those candidates, we don't have enough candidates of diversity coming out of programs to make significant enough gains towards the number to reflect the communities that we serve. We don't share in that difficulty. Of course, there's many districts across the state and the nation that face the same concerns. And I would just also share that we know through a fair amount of research that significant, what I call teacher relocation programs, have limited and short-term success, meaning recruiting from other geographic regions doesn't often result in teachers staying in the communities for long periods of time. It doesn't mean that we don't continue to look for ways in order to be successful in those efforts, but I just wanted to share with the board that there is a lot of information that if any of you are interested in having deeper and longer conversations around this, that I'd be happy to share, because we have some really good ideas about how to move this work forward, but we also know that it's challenging based on some of the conditions that we face in our economy.
Do you know, is the number of students in universities going into teaching beginning to uptick?
It is beginning to uptick. We still don't believe that it's keeping up with demand, but the nice part is we are seeing university programs that shrank during the last major economic downturn continue to grow their programs and start to expand again.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next thing on our agenda is the information list. I will point out to you again that the work session on the 16th has been canceled. We have budget meetings the following week. You should have made space in your calendar for Monday through Thursday night if needed. There will be meetings on the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. The board will meet the 24th for the canceled work session if there is or is not a budget committee meeting that night. And our next regularly scheduled board meeting is June 13th. And for those of you who thought that might be your last time to meet, Note that June 27th is on the schedule for both the work session and the school board meeting. I know. Next thing on the agenda is audience communication on non-agenda items. We have Ana Olivia Palazzo Angulo.
Hi, I'm Ana Olivia Palazzo Angulo, and I live at 3644 31st Avenue, Northeast Salem, 97301. Good evening, board chair and superintendent. Thank you. It's really great news to hear from John, by the way. Really great news. So I just wanted to talk tonight. I was in meeting with Neil Anderson earlier and found out that we are losing him, and he was on the consent agenda tonight. So I just wanted to tell you how amazing he has been and what a change that he made in this district at all levels. He was the first principal that opened his doors to our early work as a Salem Keizer Coalition for Equality when it was about 2004 or 5. There was a lot of complaints and a lot of upsets. He opened his arms and his doors and said, "Come on in and let's talk." He was very frank about, I don't know much about the Latino community, and I really would appreciate everything you can help us with. And so there became a long relationship that I remember we presented a workshop at Susan Castillo's, I think it was the conference for underrepresented and something or other back in the day. It was but it was fun because just with one year of working together and his discipline numbers dropped and the numbers of bilingual people in the school that could speak to the parents increased, and he was just one to say, I'll do this 20% and this 10% and this 40% and increase by this amount. And he always just lays it out and then he does it. And he just did it all, I was like, wow. It was amazing. And he did us the favor of telling other principals not to be afraid of Eduardo. So it was pretty neat. I just remember that. I'll never forget. I recently went and I asked him if I could talk about him. But I said, that was so awesome, and you were just so brave and bold. And he says, you have no idea how a little scared I was, but it's just very nervous, it was just amazing. And to see how far we've come now in this 2017, and it's just amazing to hear people's really understanding diversity, understanding inclusiveness, seeing all the bilingual programs. When Neil came in this year and last fall and said, my goal is to get all the bilingual schools to K through 4 and then K through 5 and increase a third high school, pathway for dual language. And I'm just like, this is like, I can't believe it after, 15 years. And it's like, it's so awesome. I was like, we don't have anything more to advocate for today, but we do tomorrow. I've got some other issues, but this was just fantastic, and I just wanted you to know how wonderful he was and is and has, made a lot of changes here, and I hate to lose him, but just wanted to tell you that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Is he turning red yet?
Next thing on the agenda is board report on activities. I don't know if we, as usual, want to make this brief.
I have to say the Awesome 3000 was Saturday. We again had over 3,000 students running. The neat message this year was that there were more corporate sponsors than ever before, and so there'll be plenty of money for innovation grants this year.
Jim?
Real quickly, I apologize about being late. I was at the middle school all-track meet.
How'd it go?
Very well. Lots of kids participating. My daughter did fine. So we haven't gotten final results yet. But I apologize about being late. If you've already mentioned National Teacher Appreciation Day, just want to thank all the teachers in the classroom and in the district. Also, in March, we haven't had these for a while, so real quickly, I wanted to mention in my real job, I get to go to National School Boards Association conferences, and Chuck Lee did a great presentation on our C-Tech program in Denver at the National School Boards Association. I think we had 40 to 50 people in the room.
At least, yes.
Very interested in what we were doing with regard to C-Tech, and it was a highlight to be able to, be there as the executive director of the state association, but also as the Salem Keizer School Board member when folks were saying this is the coolest thing they've ever seen. So Chuck did an excellent job. And I would be remiss if I didn't say how our choirs did this last weekend. We swept the OSAA championships, Sprague first, I might add, West Salem second, and South third, Nancy. But congratulations to our high school choirs. I think that may be like the 5th time we've swept those. So congratulations to our high school choirs.
Marty?
Yeah, just 2 things. I had a great time learning about the SMART program at Bush Elementary and reading with a young lady who was she was very sweet and real excited about reading. And then I was able to go to the Avid senior graduation last night. And my son should have been one of those, but he was at home sick. But at least I got to see the rest of his class walk down the stage. It was really great.
I went to a great dinner at South by the culinary program. What was totally amazing was how many of those kids were freshmen. Like the predominant number were freshmen, a few sophomores, maybe a junior, and it was an amazing meal. And I testified at the Capitol yesterday, trying to get us some more money. Never give up. Anything else, Christy? Wrap up?
All right, so my wrap-up is related to some stats around the Avid seniors. 200 seniors last night, 100% graduation rate of those 200 seniors. Nearly 100% college application rate, cumulative grade point average of 3.25, and we'll have more data points. We have one student, Jonathan Malo, North Salem High School. He's been awarded a full package at Princeton, Williams, Carleton, Lewis and Clark.
Wow.
And I think the numbers of scholarships are in the 7 million and counting for our Avid seniors. Yeah, 7 million and counting. So it's great. It's just a great night, and the student speakers and their challenges make you wonder how they got across the graduation stage and are on their way to college. So they were great stories as well.
Super. Gotta turn my page, sorry. We're adjourned.
That was quick.
I'm calling this meeting of the Salem Keizer Budget Committee to order. And would you take the roll, please, Christy?
Yes, I would be glad to do that. I apologize, many meetings this evening. Rachel Dewey Thorsett.
Here.
Rick Kimball.
Here.
Marcia Atkinson. Here. Mark Bateman.
Here.
Chris Brantley.
Here.
Lloyd Chapman. Here. Marty Hyen. Here. Jim Green.
Here.
Levy Herrera Lopez.
Here.
Adam Kohler.
Here.
Paul Kylo. Here. Chuck Lee.
Here.
Nancy McMorris Audix.
Here.
Betty Patacoli.
Here. Okay. And just for anyone who didn't catch it, Marcia Atkinson is joining us over speakerphone. Okay, so the first item on the agenda is a fairly substantial one, which is information on a number of items that people asked about in questions or just needed more fleshing out from the budget, and that is going to be handled by Superintendent Perry and Michael Wolf.
All right, so welcome, and I promised I wouldn't stand here and speak for 55 minutes tonight. So the first thing I want to do is I want to orient you to the packet you had. We tried to put the materials in a format that you could follow along with tonight. I won't read everything. I tried to put as much in writing as possible. And I want to apologize on the front end that the questions, we got about 70 questions from Budget Committee members, and we we would have loved to have had those out a day or two ahead of time so you could read them and respond, but we do have them tonight, and we'll give a process for how we ask for more questions. And so the materials are, 1, your agenda. 2, you have a series of handouts, and these I will speak from. These are your additional information. And the goal with these is to provide background and context information. And these were questions that came across multiple people to ask, and some that we knew we had to provide more information on. As I looked back at these today, as we put them together, I thought these are also some good source documents for us to update in the future and to provide Budget Committee members on the front end of the budget process. Next in your packet are the Budget Committee questions. Some of them you'll see handout 1 and 2, see handout 3, so they do go back and forth with the handout. The next thing is additional questions we had that we did not have staff time to answer, so we referred these back to you to say, is there significant interest in taking the staff time to answer these questions. Next, we have a paperclip document that looks like this. This is called Changes to the Proposed Budget, and we will actually ask you to put these in your notebook and replace Budget Committee or budget pages after tonight. And then we just put the Budget Committee deliberations and protocol back in the packet. So the first thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was handout number 1, career and technical education. And one of the presentations in the budget message was around graduation rates related to career and technical education and the increase we see in those graduation rates. And that is not only a topic on our mind, but it also provoked a number of questions. And so I thought it was important for you to know that career and technical education is funded not just in the general fund. We have other funding sources. So the way the document reads and the way we try to lay them out, the first section is an overview, and then the second section really talks about different sources. So when we talk about equity and increasing graduation rates, you can't always point to just the general fund document. So an example on career technical education is we have Perkins funding that we boost our career technical education programs with. We have secondary pathways funding that we boost our programs with. We are also using Measure 98 funding to do that. And those are all outside of the general fund budgets. Although secondary pathway comes into the general fund, it's just in a grants program. So those are the funding sources that I think it's really important to attend to. The other thing is that we do fund FTE, classroom teachers, in the general fund in Function 1131. And this includes approximately 46 FTE for career and technical education courses and pathways at each of our high schools, as well as our Career Technical Education Center. It's really important to note, and we want to continue to share this message in our community, is that career and technical education doesn't just happen at our center, it happens across all 6 of our comprehensive high schools plus Roberts. If you have people asking you are interested in which programs are at which high schools, we did link you to the district website where we have a document that shares that. The front of the document tells about numbers of programs. The back of the document gives high school by high school which programs are offered. And those are the programs that we're in the process of certifying, so that means we have a complete pathway for them. Within the questions, there were questions around career and technical education and the number of students, and this is a difficult number for us to get to because of not a robust data system or a robust validation system for our data. And one of the things you'll see when I point you to our Measure 98 expenditures is that is one of the areas that we think is really important to beef up is our data systems. If we know career and technical education changes the trajectory for high school graduation, we should be able to dig into the data to really target students for those programs. We do, one of our Perkins funding is really to work on recruitment into our career technical education programs. We know that starts before they get to high school. That starts in middle school. And so we're doing a lot of work on getting, recruiting the right kids for the right programs in career technical education, because we think that's a really important trajectory. But when you look at the data that we answered in some of the questions, it's not as clean of data as you or I would want it to be. So we did our best to provide you some technical assistance around career technical education, since we did point to it as a increase in graduation rate strategy. What I would also tell you as a budget committee that programmatically, this might be a topic that our board might want further information on, especially as we transition to a new board in July, to really have a good handle on programmatically career and technical education in our school district. So that's our first topic, and I want to go on. Like I said, I won't read all of this to you. I want to go on to Measure 98 because that's a fairly extensive one. That's handout number 2 in your packet. The first area that Measure 98 can be spent on is career technical education. The question was asked, why did you budget $400 and not $800? The answer to that is that's our best crystal ball projection at this time. When we listen to where we thought the legislature was going with Measure 98 funding, we can spend, and we could have a plan to spend $800 a student, but we thought it prudent to stick with a plan that we thought was realistic. That could change, and it can change up or down, and we'll change our strategy once the legislature decides the funding. This is a reimbursement program. It won't come to us through the state school fund. So our first area is around CTEC, and we have placed the next 2 programs of CTEC into one of our Measure 98 expenditures. If Measure 98 goes away, we will have to ask ourselves the question, do we continue with 2 program expansion at CTEC? Right now it's here, not placed in the general fund, as we were trying to juggle how do we reduce and add all at the same time. And one of our commitments with Mountain West Investments is that we add 2 programs a year. So we knew this time would come when we'd be reducing and thinking about adding all at the same time. This is our answer to that, to put it in the Measure 98 funding. We also are putting dollars for equipment for across all of our 6 comprehensive high schools. We want to target some additional career technical education at Roberts. You saw the graduation rates at Roberts, and we believe that beginning to invest in more career technical education at Roberts in some of our places is important. And then the last strategy for career technical is we have some programs that serve a lot of kids. North High School Woods is an example of that, where you have a lot of kids in a shop with kind of dangerous equipment, and we really want to target classified help for those teachers so that we aren't reducing the numbers of students in those programs. The next opportunity with Measure 98 is around college-level educational opportunities. We're focusing our efforts on Willamette Promise so we can further fund more equitable access to college-level coursework. We have it now in AP, IB, and college credit now, but Willamette Promise offers another way, and this is especially at our high-poverty high schools that might not have teachers with the credentials with a master's degree in the subject area to be able to award college credit now. So this is a separate way to get college credit. And then our work with equal opportunity schools, which is one of our equity strategies. Then the last set of strategies is around dropout prevention. And we're trying to extend the learning time for kids with this around summer bridge programs. Also, this is where you'll see our attention to a data dashboard. And we think this is important for our dropout prevention, for our CTE tracking, for us to track how our preschool kids do when they come to us, that the better technology we can get, the more predictive we can get with our investment strategies. And this is really an investment in that technology. There's also some high school credit acceleration and recovery. Currently, we have a sophomore connections program at Roberts. What we know is that when kids leave sophomore connections, they go back to their home high school and struggle. And this is to extend that to juniors and seniors as well, to provide more targeted intervention. You also see the graduation specialist here for our African American students. Remember, that was one of our highest dropout rate subgroups of students. This is where we place some attention to that. Also, Marion County partnership, and then if we can use the funding for 8th grade, which we hear we can. The problem is it hasn't been passed into law yet. It is proposed in the law, but it's not a law yet, so we can't do it yet. We would really look at professional development for CTE teachers in middle school to begin getting that CTE pathway sooner, that engagement sooner, and for summer program from students going to 7th and 8th grade. I tried to give you more detail than I will do in some of the other, because this is a new funding measure for us. And many of our strategies that are set to increase the graduation rate, decrease dropouts, are embedded in this measure 98 money. And it was a way to place strategic items when we were also experiencing reductions within the general fund. So I'm going to stop there for a minute because those were two big topics. Ask for any clarifying questions.
Do we have graduation mentors other than, this is an additional graduation mentor who is specifically for the African American community? We retained our other graduation coaches?
We have graduation coaches, one FTE, or depending on the high school, there's a half a FTE that are assigned to each of our high schools. And this is one, because those are graduation coaches, so they go out and try to get kids to come back to school after they've left our school. We put this as a graduation specialist instead of a graduation coach, because we wanted it to be more intentional on the front end before we lose kids. So, and that's a big shift we need to make, one that is not anything we've tackled yet, but one of the things we do need to tackle next is about alternative education, and how do we get kids before they leave us. And because we do know that kids need an alternative environment, we have multiple alternative environments, but I don't know if we've really studied the resources well enough in a comprehensive way. So one of the items for Assistant Superintendent Carlisle and Director of Secondary Schools, Larry Ramirez, is to really put together an alternative learning kind of group to really study the metrics, study our expenditures, and make recommendations for us. And that will be a year-long process. Our hope is that that will be rolled out in the next budget cycle.
Thanks.
Excuse me, I may have missed something in what you said. And if I did, correct me. And I am looking at page 2 of the Budget Committee questions, the chart on CTE numbers. So it's certainly the beginning of helpful information, and I understand that we haven't validated all of that.
Yep.
And I think I heard you say we don't have actual numbers on number of students who are participating in CTE. Am I correct?
Yeah,
so
we don't
far?
have unduplicated numbers.
Okay.
So the problem with these numbers is we have not validated them, number one. Number two is some of these may be counted twice,
Right.
once each semester, and
multiple classes.
And multiple classes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think I have also heard in previous meetings a very specific statistic that students who participate in CTE have a graduation rate 15% higher than our non-CTE students.
Yep.
So how, if we don't even know how many students are in CTE, how can we say that?
That is a statistics from our upload of information to ODE. And when he took this within the last 2 days, he was looking at kind of that raw information out of our system. And so at the end of the year, we do our best to validate that data and upload it. And I think that the data collection from ODE will get us better and better at this. So this is, I believe this is some current data, and that was last year's. Again, we wonder if we're still as clean as we can be about even that data we upload to ODE.
Okay.
Okay. Looks like there aren't any more questions.
All right, so I'm going to move on to the next handout is around federal programs. Federal programs are another way that we provide lots of intentionality around our students that are struggling in our schools. And it's important to note there's lots of swirl, I guess, for lack of a better word, around our federal programs. But for Salem Keizer, we get federal funding through Title 1A, Title 2A, and Title 3. Title 1 is for our high poverty schools, and Title 2A is professional development. Title 3 is for our English language learner programs. And important in this is that without this amount of money, we wouldn't have the ability to differentiate resources. So right now we have title and non-title schools. We do fund our elementary schools at a slightly lower class size when they're a title school versus a non-title school. And in addition, they get targeted funding that they as a school choose how to use in support of the students and what they need in that school. So we have oversight. It's lots of times around intervention, community outreach. There's all kinds of planning that goes into this, but this is funding that is specific for students that are struggling. And it's a big dollar amount. One of the big things I found in analysis of the budget, because budget reductions causes you to break everything apart, is as we were losing federal money, I took a really hard look at what we were spending centrally and what we were spending out in buildings. So one of the questions asked, what else are you reducing besides like two program assistants in science? The other place we're reducing some of our central office positions is in our federal programs. We have 10.5 FTE of English language acquisition specialists that come out of our central title dollars. And I think we have 7 FTE English language acquisition specialists that come out of Title III. And what I know is that those dollars need to be spent on kids in classrooms. And these people did really good work around curriculum design, really good work around professional development and some support to students. But they weren't enough to help every school across the district. So if we could fund an English language acquisition specialist at every school in the district, it would be a perfect use of central title dollars, but there wasn't enough. So 10.5 FTE across 44 elementary schools, 11 middle schools, 6 high schools. So we reallocated those dollars and some central administrative support out of title. And because of that change, we can now push out dollars to an additional 8 schools that will get dollars that they can spend. My direction is, because they're targeted assisted, you will spend them on intervention support for students in your schools. So we do have 8 additional schools that will be considered title schools this year as a result. So if you hear we have cut our English language acquisition specialists, it's not a general fund cut. It was a cut to central office in an effort, number one, we were reducing funding, and number two, to get support out to schools where I think it matters most, what we do for kids in schools. So those schools are going through a planning process right now. And then Title III, we still have some additional decisions to make around that funding. So important to know, not general fund, but something you may hear about. The next program I wanted to highlight was early childhood education. You saw the statistics on kindergarten readiness, and we have very robust preschool programs, and I thought it was important for you to know about those, not because they're in the general fund, but because we get funding sources for them. So we have about 890 5, 3 and 4-year-olds that we served during the 16-17 school years in 6 distinct preschool settings. They're funded differently. We have Head Start, Title I preschool, Preschool Promise, and then we have tuition-based preschools. The funding sources are in the middle of the page, and you will see some ads in FTE and some of those grant programs, but they're really related to funding source. So even if we wanted to take $2.9 million from Head Start and place it into our elementary schools, we couldn't, because it's really designated funds for preschool. What we do know from our early learning coordinator, Stephanie, is that students entering kindergarten from Head Start, Title I preschool, and to our Title I preschools outperform the state average on the Oregon Kindergarten Assessment in the areas of letter sounds, math, interpersonal skills, and self-regulation. She manages that data herself, and it's a data point we will put in as part of our system, because that's a really big investment in preschool, and I think it's important for our community, even though it isn't general fund, but our community to see that need. In addition, you see we spend about $750,000 of our Title I-A money on preschool because we know it increases their trajectory for 3rd grade reading. There were multiple questions around PBIS. I've answered some of those specifically in your questions and answers pages, but we did a 1-page overview of positive behavior supports, and we talked about what additions there were. This is only directly for positive behavior supports, interventions, positive behavioral intervention and supports. 2 additional FTE licensed for PBIS implementation coaches. Remember, there's that whole behavioral learning we've realigned within the budget. There's some additional budget additions there, but these are specific to PBIS. And the question was, how do we fund it and where is it funded? The bulk of the work is not called out related to PBIS. There's much of it that's done by the committed work of our teachers, counselors, behavior specialists, and building principals. Then we have the rest of those behavioral learning pieces and PBIS coaches that feed into that. So there wasn't a good way to directly tell you exactly where our expenditures were. There was a question around substitute and was there funding for substitutes. The substitutes are funded differently. They're funded out of a central function, and I've addressed this in the question and answer, but that was a intentional decision on our part, a specific decision on our part. It wasn't about budget, it was about substitute teacher supply. And we made a decision to not allow substitutes for professional development. And as a result, I think we missed some opportunities to get classroom teachers into training. So we're rethinking that as a strategy for next year, especially as we look at that subpool and do we have enough? Because, and it was Adam's question that was exactly right, is those classroom teachers have to be involved in that training. But the intentionality around having substitutes for classrooms, we need to go back and rethink that for some schools. All right, so I'm going to pause and I'm going to hand it over to Mike to do the next handouts.
Take questions on this before?
We sure can.
So any questions on the last 3 handouts? Oh, Adam.
So I have a question about the funding sources for the early childhood education.
Yep.
How has that changed from previous years? Is that a flat number?
I think let me look at the budget book to give you the exact number. The one big change is Preschool Promise, and I believe the Preschool Promise grant was actually awarded after the budget was adopted last year. So it will look potentially like a big increase in the grants budget. I believe the numbers will be consistent for numbers of kids served. I think our Head Start program also increased with funding, and we're really at the mercy of the grant funding, but a lot of that happens after the adopted budget, so we put some guesses in there around that. We're expecting the Preschool Promise, again, it's up to the legislature for that. We're expecting that to be kind of consistent funding for next year.
Okay. So now Mike will talk to us about PERS, the ending fund balance and contingency, and the May adjustment.
Yes. Good evening. So we'll start with handout number 6, and there were several individuals that ask some basic PERS questions. So we're trying to answer many of those here with this handout, and you will be able to tell us if we've actually done that. We wanted to make sure that everyone understood that we don't set the PERS rates. It sounds like a basic statement, but that's done by the PERS board, and it's based on, and this is where it gets a little interesting, it's based on the December valuation of odd years for the next biennium. So, for example, this upcoming biennium, the 17-19 biennium, those rates were based on the December 2015 valuation of the fund. And so that's what determines, basically for us, it's the unfunded actuarial liability, since the fund hasn't been fully funded for quite a long time. And those rates get released the following September. So in September of 2016, we knew officially what the rates would be for the 17-19 biennium. So that means for the 19-21 biennium, it's this December's valuation that will determine those rates. And a lot of people, when the market's doing really well today, you wonder why things aren't getting better as far as the PERS rates, because that won't affect us until the next biennium, the 19-21 biennium. And so what you have here are 3 years of PERS rates. And what I wanted to do was highlight, we have two basic groups of employees in the PERS system. We have the Tier 1, Tier 2, and we have the OPSERP, which some call Tier 3. And so in the past, in 15, 16, and 2016, we used what was a blended rate. So if we had 60% in Tier 1 and 40% in Tier 1, Tier 2, and 40% in OPSERP, we would have a weighted average that we'd put together, blended rate. And so what you would see in the 15-16 column, our overall PERS rate, and it's broken out with the Tier 1, Tier 2, OPSERP, the 6% employee pickup, which as an employer we pick up for our employees, and then the debt service that we charge ourselves through the payroll rate to pay the principal and interest of the unfunded actuarial pension bonds that we have issued as a district over the course of the years. And so you add that up. You can't add the 8.48 and the 8.48. That was one rate, but I wanted to show you that it was for both employee groups to get the 23.5%. And then in 16, 17, a similar process. And so you can see that our rate basically increased by about 1% from 15, 16 to 16, 17. And that's typically because our debt payment schedule increases. And you can find all of this information beginning on page 170 in the budget. And then the 17-18, the proposed budget, is where, as we've talked about, we've moved into more actual projections based on employee groups. So for instance, instead of a weighted average, the actual Tier 1, Tier 2 payroll rate is 16.38. So those individuals would be charged, as far as the budget, that amount, and then the OPSERP is 11.05, and then you still have the 6% pickup, and you have the 9% debt service. So now we have a range, a PERS range, of a low of a little over 26% of payroll to almost 31.5% payroll. And so a lot of questions were also asked around, well, how much money is in the debt service reserve? And I think, Chris, I think you asked, how many more times can we, tap into it? And so while this is not a financial policy, we have operated under a target. How would we create a reserve? What's the number that we would shoot for in the PERS debt service account? And so typically what we like to do is take a look at the 5-year annual average. So what's the payment stream in the next 5 years, right? Come up with an average, and then target the reserve in the PERS funds to between 50 to 75% of that average figure. And so what that would equate for the 17-18 reserve is anywhere from 12 to 18 million as the reserve fund in the PERS debt service fund. So we wanted to give you a sense of how the PERS rates have come together, the change from the past, which is where our automation has really helped us. And it's also we're able to not necessarily have to budget as much because we're much closer to the actual costs than the blended rate has allowed us to be in the past. Okay, any questions on the PERS rate, PERS system? Well, PERS system's a whole nother briefing. How about just the PERS rate?
Mike, I don't know if you can answer this, but do you have an idea of how many people we have on Tier 1, Tier 1, 2, and on the other retirement program?
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers, but we're right at a 50-50 split.
50-50?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we would expect to see that shift to more of the OPSERP over time as the Tier 1, Tier 2 employees retire.
And is our rate, if we were all Tier 2, I assume that that rate would be significantly different than Tier 1, Tier 2?
What do you mean Tier 2? You mean if we were all OPSERP?
If we were all in, if we had nobody left in
Tier 1, Tier 2?
Tier 1.
Tier 1.
In Tier 1.
Tier 1, Tier 2 are the same rate, and then there's OPSERP.
But the rate in Tier 1, 2 is higher.
It is.
Because of Tier 1, particularly.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, but there's no distinction in the rate.
I understand that.
So if we were all newer employees and not in Tier 1 or Tier 2, clearly the rate would be less by about 5.4%. So the OPSERP, the newer employees, have a different rate, and it's much lower. Now, I think what you're referencing is that decisions that were made by previous PERS boards that have really created sort of a baked-in expenditure curve that is really hard to bend. Yes, that's generally the Tier 1 employees that are still in the system, that retired under those old assumptions.
We may want to talk later to help me understand a few things.
Okay.
And I'm kind of going by my experience as a Tier 1 retiree. So out of my check every month, a certain part I paid into PERS, although actually the state did because of a raise never received, right? And that collected interest every year. I went the slow route, the guaranteed route, so I had 8% guaranteed every year. And my understanding is when I retired, then whatever I had earned, the agency I worked for had to throw in the same amount of money, and from that they calculated my retirement. Is that correct?
It sounds like you may have exercised the money match option as opposed to the full formula option, and perhaps we should talk offline on that.
Right, and so my confusion for offline is to understand for an employee now, kind of what comes out, what percentage of their check comes from them, from us, what's due at retirement, just kind of follow the life of an individual, and that would help me a lot.
Okay, no, that'd be great. I'd be happy to do that. Okay. All right,
Okay, so I think that's it for PERS.
okay. Oh, you're all too easy. PERS is complicated. All right. The next is you basically have two handouts. You have handout number 7, and then you have handout 7A. The question came up last meeting around the relationship between the contingency and the ending fund balance. So on handout 7, we want to take a little bit of time and just show you over the past, I couldn't fit more than 4 years here, which is why you've got 4 years in handout 7, but in 7A, you have the full 12-year look. We had been asked to look beyond just 3 or 5 years, so you have that data there at your disposal. So basically what we have, let's take 15, 16, which is an actual year. You can see that The adopted contingency was a little over 12 million. And any changes around the contingency, you'll notice this in 7A, that there's 4 years over that span where changes were made during the year, and actually board resolutions were passed to reduce the contingency for certain purposes. And so you'll see those in the document as well. But 15-16, there was a almost $2 million contingency. And then the actual ending fund balance was over 49 million. Now that includes the 12.2, okay? So the rest of the 49 million was underspending in the general fund, which then created a little over 11% ending fund balance. But you can see of that 11% ending fund balance, if you go down to the last set of rows, the budgeted contingency was at 2.8%. Now remember, our fiscal target is to create an ending fund balance between the 5 and 7%. So you see clearly we were above that. And as you look through the years on 7A, you can see that the actual ending fund balances have generally trended above the 7%. We also have quarterly financial reports in accordance with Executive Limitation 8, which I have a link here if you want to read that. It's part of the governance structure, policy governance structure of the board, where we're providing quarterly financial reports where we're actually providing a projected ending fund balance in those reports. So the board is up to date and current as far as what we believe the ending fund balance will be for any given fiscal period throughout the year. So we're monitoring and tracking along the way, but I just wanted to spend a little bit of time showing you that there's a budgeted contingency in every budget that will generally add to, it adds to the ending fund balance, the actual ending fund balance every year. There may be adjustments to the contingency throughout the year for various purposes. But the budgeted contingency is not the ending fund balance. It is a major component of the ending fund balance. Okay?
Betty?
So if you look at, excuse me, handout 7A, so historically, those percentages, we do well as far as whether it's the general fund or whatever it is. The actual ending fund balance percentage tends to be higher than the budgeted contingency. With that said, for 17-18, I think that budgeted contingency of 4.796, and I probably thought this last time too, should be perhaps reduced and that money used in some other way based on the fact that we don't have enough in the budget for everything we want to do.
Fair enough. And that's a really good point because the last full paragraph on 7 talks about why this year, 17-18, the contingency is budgeted a little higher than it has been in the past. And that's because the implementation of the budgeting and position control functions in our financial management system has allowed us more precise forecasting of labor expenses. So as a result, the budgeted amounts are closer to what we think the projected actual costs will be, which means we don't believe, because of the tightening of the system, that there's as much underspending built in to the general fund. Now, we don't have a track record with this new system, but being a conservative bunch, we believe that the higher budgeted contingency is warranted for the 17-18 budget. So that's why it's there, and we just wanted to explain that.
Yeah, I don't agree, but okay.
Mark and then Chris and then I have a question.
So I think I'm getting close to understanding this, Mike, but help me understand the flow from year to year. So it looks to me like if we started in 2013-14 basically, all of the contingency then flowed into the ending fund balance.
Yes. Did you say 12, 13?
13, 14.
Okay, in 13, 14, 300, almost 350,000 was pulled out. But yes, basically,
Okay.
almost all of it did.
Well, so let's actually jump ahead, because, so help me understand the relationship between 15, 16 and 16, 17. Because we had a $12 million budgeted contingency in 15, 16, and a $49 million ending fund balance. And then in 16, 17, we had a $14 million budgeted contingency, but our ending fund balance ended up being $6.5 million less than what the ending fund balance was in the previous year. So does that mean that we spent $6.5 million from the contingency?
No, not from the contingency, and I would say that 16, 17 is double asterisk, which is, this is a projected amount, because we won't know what the actual ending fund balance is until we close the books and have the financial audit. But to go along with the flow of the conversation, we wouldn't, if we spent the contingency down, the only way we can spend the contingency is to come to the board and ask for permission through a resolution. So using this example, none of the contingency was spent in those years, and it rolled into the ending fund balance.
So help me understand how the ending fund balance in 16, 17 is going to be anything below the ending fund balance in 15, 16.
Sure. And when we built the budget in 16, 17, we knew that we needed to spend the ending fund balance down, because our financial goal is not to have a 10 or 12% ending fund balance every year. That's money that's not going into the classroom. So you spend it down by the ads that last year when we went through those ad packages in this process, that helps spend the ending fund balance down, the projected ending fund balance. That's part of it. But it wasn't a reduction in the contingency.
Okay, so some line item in the 16, 17 budget, or some combination of line items, in essence was, we're going to spend $6.5 million from the ending fund balance.
Yeah, and remember that the ending fund balance, or the projected ending fund balance, because of the timing of this, becomes your projected budgeted beginning fund balance. So
right.
We're always in it's a dynamic situation. It's not a precise number, but I would say that that's part of the resources that you have when you build a budget. You have to take into account the projected ending fund balance, which doesn't necessarily equate to the budgeted beginning fund balance. We've had, I think the numbers here on the 49 million, we had a budgeted beginning fund balance of over 52 million. And so the actual ending fund balance was 49. So we have to make those adjustments, but you make them in like 2 budget cycles later. As you're truing up, you get better numbers, and the spend down as well.
So so I don't have my document open, but what's our projected beginning fund balance for 17, 18? Is it 41 million?
I don't, I'll go get it. So for the general fund,
17 million.
hang on a second. As I'm looking for this, Mark, is there more to the question that we might be able to help with?
Just trying to then understand the relationship to the 22 million budgeted contingency in the 17, 18 budget.
Okay, so if you go to 40, page 40, you'll see that the proposed beginning fund balance is 38 million. You'll see that in 16-17, the beginning fund balance was estimated at 52 million. And actually, Jim, I think you brought this question up last meeting. So that's a $14 million spend down, but these are two budgeted numbers. Okay, they're not tied to an actual ending fund balance. And I think maybe that's part of the disconnect.
I think part of, at least what I'm trying to figure out is, and it's not that anybody's doing anything wrong, it's just because there's such a lag in the numbers, what's our general track record in, do we have a tendency to underspend our budget so that we can better understand the projected budget, and is that also likely to have the same kind of underspending?
Yeah, I think, let me take that one. Yes, we have a track record of not a tight budgeting system. And when I get to the questions, I'm gonna point you to a couple places where you identified that already in the budget book. And because of things like blending the PERS rate or not accounting for what you knew would be retirees in the system, we had a history of not tight budgeting. The automated system, our financial strategy is to budget more accurately. So that's the tricky part, especially in a downturn year. You would like to go to that contingency and say, hey, let's put money towards X, Y, and Z because you have a history. We haven't budgeted in the same way. And I'll point you to some of those examples. And again, we don't have a track record for it. We know we've validated the positions. HR and financial have put their heads together on this down to every person within the organization, but it is a much tighter budgeting system.
So
And
is the point of that the history is less valuable this year than it's ever been?
Yes, we can't count on the trends like we could in the past. So we're creating a new baseline and moving forward. And one of the basic premises in public budgets is if you either create such a tight budget that your contingency is closer to your actual ending fund balance, right? Or you have underspending that you have to count on in addition to the contingency to reach your financial target of 5 to 7% ending fund balance.
So I'm going to add one more thing. If we wouldn't have changed the system and if we would have been the same district to budget the same way, you wouldn't have seen us come forward with this sort of a contingency amount. So we would have budgeted in our contingency much more identical to what we did in the past. So tighter budgeting system, but it was an intentional decision to raise that contingency because we knew we had identified areas of underspending in the budget.
And following on that, if you hadn't changed the budgeting system and had been able to budget a lower contingency, you would have also been able to budget fewer actual positions in the budget because each of them would have had to be a little fluffier. I mean, if you're expecting more underspending, it means that each particular line item is slightly more inflated.
Yeah.
So you can actually, so the goal here was to be able to budget more tightly and cut fewer things, but the trade-off was being more conservative about contingency.
Yes.
So we should have spent it in previous years.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a bad.
That's a joke. That's a joke.
I'm laughing. I really, it's hard to see, but I am laughing. Yeah.
And I guess, okay, Marty, and then I think I have one more, but.
So the contingency is basically, if I understand it correctly, for unexpected expenses, and if we're lucky to have enough left over, maybe some sort of upgrade or something towards the end of the budget cycle. Is that correct? No, that's wrong, says
Well, no,
Christie.
the last part, I mean, the contingency is it's a insurance measure to some degree to ensure that you have almost a guaranteed amount that will be going towards your ending fund balance, and it is there for unforeseen expenses. If something happens, I have to say, a 5 to 7% ending fund balance in a district this size will get you about a month and a half payroll. I mean, it sounds like a lot of money, but it's really not for an organization our size.
What happens if you have an ending fund balance of 0?
Then I wouldn't have a job. Well, first of all, we can't. We have to, one of our financial policies, the same one that says our target is between 5 and 7%. So we work hard to build the budget that will get us at least the 5 to 7%. You can see that over the course of the years, we've been doing okay. But we also have a minimum contingency of 1%. So that's the other part of our financial policy. So we couldn't build a budget and follow our financial policies without at least a 1% contingency.
So, Mike, bottom line is, with this new budgeting process, working with HR, we should be closer to a 5 to 7, looking at trends going forward. We had some, for lack of a better term, fluff in the budget built in previously, but now we are aligned with what we're doing on data collection with regard to HR expenses. So on a going forward basis, we should see a trend closer to the 5 to 7% within our ending fund balance.
Yes, generally, and it will take a while to get there.
Sure.
I mean, I wouldn't expect us to be hitting it next year exactly.
Well, we wouldn't be
but
able to see it next year because we have to wait
Right.
until that following budgeted year to see budgeted numbers again.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't need to get into this now, but the standard GFOA practice would be 10 to 12% as an ending fund balance. So clearly, there are different standards that the district could use. We use 5 to 7%. Mhm.
So to put a little bit different spin on it, so if we did spend all the money, there was no underspending at all, and the contingency stayed where it is, we'd end up at 4.74%. So we'd be slightly below the 5 to 7, correct?
That's right.
So that's another way to look at the contingency. It gets us to the base of the requirement by the board to be between 5 and 7.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Chris?
I think what I'm hearing from around the table is the desire to not have a 10.97 as we did a couple of years ago at the end of the year, because the feeling is that we need to, if we have that money, we ought to be cutting class sizes or something with it. One of the questions that I have is, it would really help me to know how much money we're really talking about as I look across those numbers. It looks to me like it sort of averages around 8%. The actual ending fund balances back over the years. If our goal is 5 to 7%, and we could actually say, let's look at the middle, that's about 2% of our annual budget that historically, average-wise, we probably haven't spent. I just did a quick little thing on my calculator and took one of these $693 million kinds of numbers and multiplied by 2% and said, how much money is that? It's about $13 million. And so that's a huge hunk of our whole. And so what I'm hearing this budget committee say, now, obviously, I just did that on my calculator based on funny numbers, but.
And hang on, that
I-
was
I-
total funds. You just apply this to general fund,
Oh,
which is
that,
much lower.
okay, see, that's what I'm saying. What I would like to be able to know, and I think what I'm hearing the budget committee say, is how much money have we traditionally over time not spent that we might have spent? And is there a way to predict that, given the new system and the fact that you've budgeted about 1.5% more in contingency than you have in the past? So that we can say, yes, there's enough money there that we would like you to look at closing that gap and saying, what would we do with that? I'm going to throw a number out, $2 million. Or if the number is so small that it's not worth really messing with, not bugging you anymore. So I'm trying to speak for what I'm hearing around the table here, is that people are wondering how much of a gap is there there? Is there enough money there for us to think about spending? And if there is, we might, as a budget committee, make a recommendation to spend $2 or $3 million more dollars than is there. But I'm just making numbers up off the top of my head here, so it would be interesting to know what those numbers actually.
1%'s about 4 million. It's right here.
1%'s about 4 million, and if it's actually 2%, then it's $8 million or something like that.
That's good math.
It's pretty hard.
I just picked the wrong number to divide, didn't I?
So just to try not to belabor this too much more, but one of my questions was, in the times when we have spent the contingency, what sort of things has it been on?
Yeah, typically, again, on the contingency,
Yeah,
okay,
when-
not
when-
the ending
when
fund.
the
Oh,
board
thank you
votes
for
to
shifting
take,
the focus, okay.
$500,000 out of contingency,
Yeah.
what's the thing that's come up that's?
So let's go with 14-15. You'll see 560, almost 561,000 pulled out. So in 14-15, we invested in one of our CTP programs, about almost $200,000, and it was, you may remember when we moved into the Salvation Army and renovated, and also that was lease space. That was an emergent need, and that was part of it. And then the other part of it was during collective bargaining negotiations with our classified association, and that agreement didn't get agreed to until after the adopted budget. And so there was an increase in wages to the tune of almost $370,000. So that's a great example of, what the contingency is there for as well. And so,
Didn't
just.
we buy Spanish books out of it?
We did, yeah, we did.
Other piece of, the wanting to spend everything we have to spend and not squirrel it away, is that it seems to me just as much of an issue is making sure that the beginning fund balance that we project, that we start a budget with, is roughly parallel with what we expect the ending fund balance to be. Because, realistically, what we can spend each year is the beginning fund balance plus all the revenue. So the problem isn't so much, we may not want to get into a situation where we don't have a beginning fund balance if we want to be able to spend more in a year than the revenue we have. But what's a little more concerning is if we are projecting a beginning fund balance of 30 million and we end up with an ending fund balance of 50 million, then there's kind of 20 million out there that's has to float along until the next year. And so it's, that seems to me as big a piece as.
It is. Yeah, so tightening the budget up means tightening all of it. And so that's our ability to project what we begin the next budget cycle with as well. And so you hit on it. And all the components work together. So there's the beginning fund balance, there's what you budget for the contingency, and what your expenditure plan is. And so the ending fund balance gives the district the flexibility to weather a storm of a down biennium. And to the extent that that matters, it's a good thing to have. And there are always trade-offs, because if you have that, then that means other things aren't getting funded. But that's the conversation that the Budget Committee needs to have.
Anything else on this topic that perhaps we've beaten to death now? So the next item is the May adjustment.
Yes, no handout for that. Unfortunately, the district won't be receiving a positive May adjustment this year. It's kind of a combination of things. One, we had built in a $1 million assumption that we would be, so that was part of our resources into the budget. And we had a significantly negative adjustment to our high-cost disability trend. So the net effect of that is almost $3 million less revenue for the 17-18 budget. So again, that's less than 1%, but that's why you have a contingency as well to carry you through the variations of projected revenues versus the actuals throughout the year. So unfortunately, there isn't additional money that we can talk about the appropriate use for this year.
Kim?
So did we have fewer ADMW for our high-cost disability
Our projection was higher
than our actual?
than our actuals.
Okay.
Yeah, and we will make sure that we're much closer. Well, we already have adjusted some of our numbers and some of our ELL numbers as well in anticipation of next year's May adjustment.
May adjustment questions? Okay. So the next item on the agenda is the questions that were submitted by email. Do we want to take 5 minutes or so to read the answer?
Why don't I highlight a couple things about them, unless you say something different, and then
maybe take
and then
5
take 5
minutes?
minutes, or we can ask more questions later. So, first of all, I want to answer Adam's question about preschool. There is a $600,000 increase in the preschool programs. That's on page 141 in your book. I believe that's not going to yield $600,000 in new spots. I believe that's because there was an increase in Head Start and an increase in the preschool promise that came after the adopted budget. That's my recollection on that. The second thing I wanted to say is, Mark, if I just would have taken your CTE question at face value, we would have pulled our data from last year that we've sent to, and we got caught up in the moment of that. So I think we actually have that concentrator data numbers from our ODE data, and we'll get that to the budget committee. So basically, the questions you had that really related to the budget document, they kind of came in 4 categories. So it'll feel like we're saying the same thing over and over again, but it's because we didn't explain it clearly on the front end of the process. So we just wanted to be sure you got a clear answer. But there were places where it was related to the automated system. There were places that people were asking questions, and we have to remember those first 2 columns are actuals, and those are actuals after we've expended the dollars, and the column we're proposing to you is budgeted numbers, not actuals, so those numbers do change. And when you automate the system, that change can be big. When you really start being better at projecting those actuals, I think you'll see a better trend pattern from actuals to budgeted items to actuals in the future. There were some places where we just needed to align to a current practice, so it wasn't something we highlighted in the budget message. And then there were places where we did one-time expenditures, and I didn't count one-time expenditures as a reduction, because something like Ready Gen, I didn't highlight that in the budget message. What we talked about moving forward, though, is that we clearly footnote those in the budget document for you, so that you'll remember that this was a one-time expenditure. So I'm not going to go through all these, but I will tell you, if you look at number 5, or page 5, question number 19, if you look at employee insurance, this is an example where the number changed because of our automated system. So the question was, how can you explain the significant change on employee insurance? And it is a decrease in part because we're reducing FTE, but when you budget exactly for what employees are given with a cap, and you have some employees that don't take it, we fully loaded all of those before to every employee and every FTE. So that's an example of tightening the system. An example of current practice is around student transportation. We've been paying for middle school athletic transportation all this year and previous years, but we hadn't ever budgeted it correctly. So this isn't adding more bus runs, it isn't adding more sports, it's only accurately budgeting our expenditures. And we had a practice at times that if it wasn't, that we would spend but not then adjust the budget for the future years. So you'll see some of that. Another good example of the automated system is also on page 7. Question number 24 and 25 are really that automated system answer. So we tried to be as detailed as we could in our answers and to tie you back to the budget document wherever possible. In choosing which questions to answer, we tried to stick with what were really budget questions, what were program questions we could easily answer. Like somebody asked about the diversity of our students, and we had prepared that information for a different presentation, and so we just went and grabbed it and put it in. So we tried to answer every question we could, even if they weren't exactly budget questions. So that was how we tackled it and got kind of as far as we thought we could in the amount of time. So with that, do you want to give people reading time?
So I would suggest that we took a 5-minute or so break in which we did a couple of things. One is look at the answers to the questions and see if there are quick follow-ups that you need to ask to understand them. And the other, which may take more discussion, is for the questions that weren't answered. Those can be brought back, and if 6 people want an answer, that can be sent out to staff to get an answer. And with those, I would suggest that you try and kind of separate in your mind the ones that you feel need to be answered in the next couple of weeks before we deal with this document, and other ones that possibly you really think the budget committee should know the answer to, and that these are things that should be discussed more generally in the budget process. And those, I think, maybe we don't want to task staff with trying to answer in the next couple of weeks, but we should probably think about calendaring a meeting where we either discuss further what we need to know or see if we can get some answers to them. So just kind of try and break down what do I need to know before I vote on this document, and what do I think it would be a really good to have as part of the ongoing budget process that maybe I can wait to know until.
And we have in the past done a series of infrastructure reports ahead of the budget process, and Rachel had talked to us about that early on this year. And as we talked about it, we got really focused on our equity work and our equity lens, and so we felt like the board needed to tackle that work versus the infrastructure report. So we can come back into that cycle of doing some sort of work sessions with the budget committee ahead of the budget process.
Is it possible while we're doing our 5 minutes of reading for the room to be warmed at all?
I will ask, because I don't need to read these, because I've read them multiple times, so I'll check.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so 5 minutes or so. Try and be back before 8:40. First, are there any
Elementary, middle, and high school.
explanations needed in your quick review of the answers we got? Anything that, is complicated may be better done in a follow-up email, but if there's a, Mark?
I think it would be really helpful if Superintendent Perry had an opportunity to talk about the equity lens and how it was applied to the budget process. I think that would be good for the whole community to hear.
So I started walking you through that with the presentations because in part I wanted you to understand that the way we have intentionality around our groups of students that are struggling is through those different funding sources. So as just a reminder though, the equity lens was recently adopted by the budget committee, and the budget process begins in October and was well underway prior to board action. I did in my budget message lay out a number of stats and statistics related to how our students were doing that I thought was important for you to tell. or to know, the intentional message with the data around the areas for improvement was important, and this immediately focused you on the equity work. The more difficult thing to analyze as a budget committee is the intentional investments that happen outside of those general funds, which is why I gave you briefing papers. And I'll just list the examples. You know, early childhood education, kindergarten readiness, our students were half as prepared as students across the state on average. And so we have some investments there. The Title I funding and our federal funding and the way we've reallocated the funding out to schools so that 8 additional schools receive funding. These are schools that have approximately 50% of their kids on free and reduced lunch or 50% in poverty, and some intentional investment in those schools was important. We also focused our Measure 98 money on CTE, dropout recovery, and rigorous course options. In addition, the only high school we expanded in this first round was Roberts, which is the place you saw the lowest graduation rate. Our school-wide title elementary schools are funded at 2 less students per classroom. And in addition, you don't see this very clearly in the budget, but North High School and McKay High School are provided an additional FTE for intervention support in the current year and in the future year. So equity is our focus. The lens was adopted after we were well into the budget process. And as a budget committee, I think you're going to continually have to look across all programs to know, are we providing resources in the places we need them?
So Christy, a follow-up on that. Do you have any plans for how you might change the process next year to do that investigation within underserved communities that's called for in the equity lens?
Are you thinking about feedback too?
I'm just
the process or learning where we should invest. That's the key. We already have some plans in our with the NAACP around going out into those communities, and we do some of that, and we did some of that with our English learner program realignment. But I think that has to be an ongoing and intentional effort related to that ahead of the budget process. The tricky part in the budget process is the proposed budget comes to you first. So it's not like I can go out and say, here's where I'm thinking about cutting or adding. What do you think? Because really budget law requires you to get that. So it'll be about the intentional listening and the intentional looking at our data ahead of the budget process.
So related to that, and many of you will know this is something that I've struggled with over the years, is there a way or opportunity for us to elongate our process so that there can be, we're stop one, but that there is more time for those intermediate outreach efforts to various sectors of our community that can actually have an impact on the end product?
That's real.
Let me take a shot at it.
Okay.
I think it's the work of the board through the executive limitations, and that's some of the work that was just done prior to our board meeting tonight, where board members were assigned an executive limitation and the equity lens to look through some of that. I don't mean to jump on your toes here, but that's some of the work that the board needs to do, because we just adopted the equity lens, and it was a lot of work. I mean, it was 4 or 5 meetings on top of the normal work that we do as a school board. I think it's the work of the school board working with our superintendent over the next year before our budget is presented to look at how we use that lens in the allocation of resources. And Marty and Linda Myers and I were given budget and a variety of other ones, and I apologize for missing that meeting earlier tonight, but I think that's the work that needs to occur, Mark. And then it is a discussion at the budget committee level in the future years with regard to how have we done in allocating those resources using the equity lens for our students across our district. I don't mean to jump in, Christy, but that's kind of the vision of what at least one board member saw with regard to the adoption of our equity lens.
Well, and the hard part about the budget process, this process, is it's about the document and
meeting statutory timelines.
And meeting statutory timelines. And we still, on this date, don't know the exact dollar amount for revenue. So that's that's the push and pull of how do you get information in. So thank you, Jim. That's a great way to
And it'll
frame it.
change a little bit of the philosophy of the school district now that we have that equity lens in place, using it as we work through our executive limitations, the ones that we work with our superintendent on as a board and a community, and through the strategic plan adoption, which I think over the next couple of budget cycles, you'll see that, and it'll be interwoven into the document as we move forward. But it's pretty new. There's still a lot of issues that the board are working through with it, and we want to make sure that we've got our community partners in line with what our equity lens looks like on a going forward basis.
And I'm completely comfortable with that approach, and just really want to emphasize the documentation of what that process was and where those conversations had an impact on the document that ends up being presented to this committee.
I was just going to speak as a lame duck short timer and basically say that what my hope is that as that equity lens gains traction in the district, that what starts to happen is that the underserved populations, in the work that you do around trying to make them more and more successful, that part of that discussion is what resources might be put forward, and that then be brought forward in the budget process to say, as we were working with X population over this particular problem, here's what we decided would help, and this is how we've put that into the budget.
Nancy?
Well, I think, I know that Rachel had really wanted to have a longer budget conversation this year and look at those infrastructure reports as well. And I think also as a short timer, that this equity work really has been enormously valuable and will change the tone of those infrastructure reports if the budget committee chooses to do those in the next budget cycle or in the lead up time to the next budget cycle. So I would hope that that would happen. And I'm hoping that the work that we're doing now gives you a good lens to do that work.
Yeah, I serve on the community advisory group to the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Unit for the Oregon Department of Education, and we were looking at some of the tools that the Oregon Board of Education is using to take the equity lens from a framework into a tool that you can actually use to evaluate the work. So it is being done at the state level, and maybe the school board and the budget committee could look at that in the coming years.
One of the things that I would suggest is that at the end of this cycle, rather than just recommending a budget to the board and breathing a sigh of relief and dashing out of the meeting, that we spend a little bit of time discussing as a group how to stay more closely in the loop of things like the equity lens and decisions that are being made that are going to impact the budget. Because I have a feeling that what happens to a lot of us is that we know that a lot of work has gone on to put the budget together, but we're then kind of trying to understand it in a fairly compressed time scale, and that produces the barrage of questions, and that a process where more of us were at more intermediate meetings and heard more of the reports would lead to fewer long emails with many questions. So are there other follow-ups to questions that were answered? If there aren't, then there were 12 questions, some of them connected, that did not manage to get answered. And so I kind of have two questions about each one. One is, are there questions that people feel need answering in order to act on the budget that's before us? And then, kind of more broadly, are there questions that we should be talking about in this agenda item that I've added to the end of the last meeting, where we look ahead to next year? So I guess, of the 12 questions, does somebody want to propose ones that they want answered by the time we have to act on the budget? Mark?
So, in all transparency, an awful lot of these questions are ones that I originally put forward. And I had a helpful conversation with Mike earlier today, giving me a heads up that a number of these were not going to be answered. And I guess first, I want to congratulate staff on the amount of information that you have provided in this process, and tonight specifically, because it is significantly more than we have gotten in previous years. And that is a tremendous step forward. And I appreciate that. I also want to affirm the comment that you made, Superintendent Perry, that a number of these documents probably should have been in the original budget document, and I look forward to them being there in updated form in subsequent years. As I look at the questions on this list, and I guess I'm thinking about questions 1 through 10, which are ones that I submitted. They sort of break out into 3 categories as I think about them. The first is questions 2, 5, and 8 actually seem like really easy questions to answer, and I'm not quite sure why they weren't. If something's a yes/no question, it should be pretty straightforward to answer. So I guess I would suggest that those 3 be answered because they are such straightforward questions. Questions 6 and 7 are more budget structure kinds of questions, and they may be too much to try and answer now, but I would suggest that having a better understanding of budget structure issues like, so how cyclical, if they are any of these funds, would be an important thing for us to understand so that we can really get what the trend line is in the budget and have a better sense of the total context of what we're dealing with. And then the questions 1 and 9, I understand that they're data intensive. I'm a researcher, I'm a data guy, I like data. But they really are the context of a lot of the public policy conversations that people have about educational outcomes. And so I like the idea of more briefings ahead of time. I don't want to hold up this process. But I would suggest that those are the kinds of things that ought to be a standard part of the background context that are available to budget committees as they consider a document that in theory represents the strategic priorities of the school district. So I don't know if you want any of that in a motion. If so, I would be happy to do that. But that's the way I think about that set of 10 questions and the way I categorize them.
Okay, let me try and break this down a little bit. So it seems to me that 2 and 8 are yes/no questions that there should be.
As I look at it now,
So can we just sort of cross those off the list and say?
I have a follow-up to 8, a
Yeah,
follow-up question, because I don't know what the reference to was from the candidate forum, so I think the number 8, I don't know what that is.
Okay, well, we can probably back that down.
Follow up.
Okay. How difficult is the cost of a recruitment of it? I mean, I guess there are 2 questions. One is, how difficult is that to come up with? The second is that really a piece of information that we need to deal with
To me,
this
that you have a big fair and a whole bunch of people walk in and you hire some of those people, and that's pretty cheap recruitment. You also go looking for people who will represent more diversity, and that's a whole lot more expensive. So it's not such a simple answer, because you have all these multiple ways of recruiting.
Who else would like to know before May 22nd what the approximate cost of recruitment of a teacher is?
Can I clarify the question and why it's relevant? I mean, there are lots of different ways we spend money, but I assume we've got a budget for how much we're going to spend on recruiting teachers. And we know how many teachers we end up recruiting, and so it should be a simple division problem. What I'm interested in at some point is what's the comparison of how much it costs to recruit a teacher versus how, and that tells us what the cost of turnover is. And that's a key business management kind of concept. You want to reduce the amount of turnover. So if there are opportunities to spend money to retain teachers so that we don't have to spend money to recruit teachers, where do those opportunities exist, and is that something that we should be prioritizing? And I mean, maybe there's an opportunity for the budget committee to be part of that conversation, maybe not, but it is a budget concept.
So with that clarification,
Might I suggest something just before
okay.
you do this? And the suggestion is that new teachers, the cost of new teachers is not just recruitment, it's also induction. And so if we're really looking at keeping teachers versus getting new ones, we really ought to be looking at the cost of recruiting and induction for a new teacher versus the cost of retaining somebody that's likely to leave.
So I guess my question is this a next 2 weeks question, or is it something we want to be asking the board to look at?
That could be added into my third category of background data and context.
Okay, background. Okay. So which were your second category?
6 and 7 are budget structure issues. So what's the longer track record of these funds so that we can understand it beyond the very short time frame that we have here? That may be something that it's better to say for next year. It's a more detailed way of looking at how the budget is structured so that we as the budget committee can actually understand the full context of what we're doing. It's not something we have to have this year, but it really ought to be a part of our process.
So is that something we can also put off to the next year? Okay.
Could I ask Mark a question?
Sure.
Is your thinking that these kinds of questions that you have here is something that might be put into a budget committee member's handbook or something so that a new budget member could sort of read up on what the history and the trends are in school budgets, or at least in the Salem Keizer budget?
That could
Is that
certainly
really
be
what you're looking for?
I mean, that could be part of it, but I mean, I guess what I'm really looking for is, is this current budget proposal in any way an anomaly in the trend? So if we see a fund budget go down significantly, but it turns out that that's a cyclical fund, then we don't need to be concerned about that. If it's supposed to be flatline and the trend is flatline, and it goes down significantly, then that's something we're going to have more questions about. And that's a year-to-year thing. It's not just a budget committee member training kind of concept. The other thing is we're citizen members who are here representing the whole community. So part of this is, how are we explaining this entire document and making this entire document relevant to the community so that they have trust in the system?
Do you want to comment?
Not on that last piece, but on the volatility of the funding for any of the budgets. Generally speaking, and this isn't an attempt to answer the question for future conversations, but we live biennium to biennium, and we're almost entirely dependent on the legislature. So there's one fund that I can tell you is very volatile, and it swings wildly from any biennium to the next. And that's the majority of the budget at this point, and will be in the future, is the general fund. So there is a quick answer to that. But I don't think it's sufficient given the rest of the context of your discussion. But yes, there is one fund that we can't count on being flat or adequate, and that's the general fund.
So, other questions that people would like answered between now and the next meeting? Lloyd?
At the budget process last year, I raised a question about class size and why weren't we looking at class size? And the answer that came back was, well, we don't really have classrooms. It's that kind of information that we don't know that's difficult. But I particularly like the first question. It doesn't have to be every school, but if I think it would be pretty easy to know the teacher-student ratio for a whole school, that we probably have a pretty good idea. And there's probably a pretty wide range of what those are. And if I saw a half dozen schools and said, here is the range of class sizes, because, the teacher that I have volunteered with for years was having 32 in her third grade class. And this year, she had 24. You get a sense about how the population in schools change, and that the numbers, you just get a sense of the differences, and that the school that I volunteer at, do we have, what classrooms do we blend this year? It changes a lot, but that kind of information, I think, would be valuable for the community to have a better sense of why they have as many kids in a classroom as they have. So I would like to see some information about that, not necessarily exactly this question answered, but a general idea about what are class sizes, what is the range, what is the average. We know what the target, but what kind of range do they fall in general, because I think that would be useful for moving forward on other things that the board wants to do.
Marty?
Yeah, in the questions I submitted, I didn't see it in the list, and what I was wondering is, we are increasing the number of out-of-district students that are transferring in. I understand they can do so, but when we're having overcrowding, why would we want additional students from outside our district when we're already busting at the seams? It looks like there some sort of tuition's coming in to cover the expense, but it adds to the size of the classroom.
I have a question that I need answered, that I think everyone also needs answered. We got this thing. And it has page numbers in it. Are we supposed to take page 15 out and put this page 15 in?
That's actually the next agenda item.
Oh.
We're not actually at the end of the meeting.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So there is, I've lost my agenda now, but there is one more agenda item after we deal with the questions, which
Okay,
is
sorry.
the changes to the proposed budget. I guess we are sort of morphing into committee discussion now, so.
Levy has a question,
Yeah.
it looks like.
Okay, Levy.
So one of my questions is on this list also, but it's also about class size, and I don't feel that I need to have it before May 22nd, but I think it is important to give some information to the community when they see that some classes are going to go up to, I think, if I remember correctly, it was 32 in some levels. I may be misremembering, but when people hear those numbers, they get a negative reaction. So I think there's got to be some more information, and I see it more of part of the job of getting more information out to the community. It's not something that I feel I need to have before I make decisions to.
So could I make a suggestion, since class size seems to be where would it be possible to get kind of a one-page summary of some of the issues, like is there a policy and what the ranges are, and things like title schools being targeted for slightly lower classes. You know, some kind of one-page thing that would answer some of these questions to go along with the, you know, in the next couple of weeks.
Yep. And I think it's some current trends.
Yeah.
Because it will be, we got to remember, we have current data, and then we have future projections. And those are tricky, but we can attempt that. I don't know if it will meet the exact mark. So we'll just attempt it. How about that? Because the questions come in different directions.
Rick?
I think we need 6 individuals
Okay,
to say that
so,
that's the direction we want to go, because
Okay,
that's staff
so,
time.
right. So are there,
Could I put another recommendation first?
oh, okay.
A task force was recently convened and provided a pretty extensive report on that, addressing class size.
Oh, okay.
And could that report provide that information in terms of the approach? Is that?
Is that
You
something we
mean the
could just?
facilities
Yes,
task
a facilities
force?
task force, which part of that was addressing
About
class size.
classroom.
If I could, am I on? Yeah. So the task force used targets, goals for class sizes as part of the assessment process. I think it would be important information as just context for the conversation.
that's
Yeah,
my
for
point.
sure.
Yes.
Yeah. And also the PSU enrollment forecast, so you can get a sense from a research-based organization what the future could look like for the district, and then the actual and previous class sizes. Once it rolls through the process, depending on where y'all land, as Superintendent Perry said, if that's where you want to go, we can attempt to pull something together for the 22nd.
So are there, Marty?
So if we're going to get additional information on class sizes, it would be helpful to me to know how many total students we're talking about that are out of district and how that affects our class sizes.
So I guess the first question is, are there 6 people who want this information by the 22nd? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Nancy raised
Oh,
her hand.
6. Okay. So is that?
Marcia is 6.
What? Oh, okay, Marcia.
You're 7.
Okay, I think we're up to 7 now. So that is something that you and Mike can pull together? Okay.
Before we leave the topic,
Yeah.
do we still have the budget guide for the community that we put out? Do we have class size in there as information to the community? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Is there anything besides class size that we want to get handled before the 22nd? And if there isn't, I think I will, given the lateness of the hour, ask people to think about other bigger questions for this discussion after the adoption. And if there aren't anything else, then we have one more agenda item on what has changed since last week, 2 weeks ago, in the budget.
Okay, this will be quick. This is your homework assignment. You don't have to flip the pages tonight. I just wanted to give you a background. The reason for most of these pages, the vast majority of them being changed and need to be updated, is because remember the fiber project that we've talked about for a while? That's a $15+ million investment, okay? So the asset to the district, we will own a fiber optic network worth over $15 million. We didn't budget and book it as a $15 million investment in the proposed budget that we gave you. We talked to ODE and our auditors, and the better way to approach this, the appropriate way to approach this, is to book the entire investment in the budget. And that helps with the budgeting, obviously, and the accounting. What I want to be clear with everybody is, the way this is set up with E-rate, we didn't have to front-load $15 million as a district, because E-rate reimburses 80%. of the investment. So we've been talking about, really, the cost to the district is a little over 3 million. That's what we had in the budget, right? The way we've got the contract set up with the construction contractor is they bill directly to the feds and get the 80% reimbursement, and then bill to us the remaining 20. So there's where the 3+ million comes in the budget, but we have to book the entire value of the asset in the budget. So that changes the charts, the percentages, the total budgeted amount has jumped up to 683.
Mike,
Okay.
is that in the general fund? Is that where do we see
no.
that? Where do we see it?
No, it's not in the general fund. It's in the special projects fund. Yeah, capital projects fund. And great question, Betty. Let's go all the way to the last page. And I won't go over this unless you have questions, but that's where it's budgeted, page 183. And you'll see the 1990 miscellaneous resources. There's the additional 12 million on top of the 3 that we'd already built in. Okay?
Mike, wasn't that contingent on the project being completed?
No, we have the grant.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we have been awarded the full amount, but it's reimbursable. It's not like they give us the 15 million and then we spend it.
Oh, no, I thought ownership, the school district didn't take over ownership until the project was 100%.
That's true.
Be done
Yeah.
in this year.
Yeah, we don't own it until it's done.
But it'll be done in this budget year.
That's the intent, unless we get an extension. Yep. But because we're receiving the grant this budget year, it's in this budget. Okay, if there are no questions.
Did you have a question, Jim?
No.
You- Are you sure?
Pretty sure.
Okay, then.
So, if in going through these handouts or the budget in general, you have come across other questions you want answered, they should be submitted to Mike Wolf by 5 p.m. on Monday, May 15th. And I am going to assume that the item 6 on committee discussion, we pretty much dealt with in the review of budget committee questions, unless there are other items people want to bring up. If not, we are adjourned until Monday, May 22nd, where we will be meeting to take public comment.
Never answered my question.